I had barely pulled into my driveway when the chaos began. My arms were full of grocery bags, my keys still dangling from the ignition, and all I wanted was to unload my stuff, kick back, and enjoy a quiet Saturday. But, of course, the universe had other plans. The first sign of trouble was the sharp, rapid click of heels against pavement. Not the casual pace of a neighbor out for a stroll. No, this was something else, purposeful, aggressive, and headed straight for me. I turned, expecting to see someone in distress, maybe a lost delivery driver or a neighbor needing help. Instead, I came face to face with a woman I'd never seen before, striding up my driveway like she owned the place. She looked to be in her late 40s, with an aggressively short haircut, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of scowl that suggested she had never been told no in her entire life. Even before she opened her mouth, I could sense the entitlement radiating off her. "I need your car," she announced, crossing her arms like that was supposed to seal the deal. I let out a short laugh, expecting some kind of follow-up, a joke, an explanation, anything. But she just stood there, waiting. "Excuse me?" She huffed, like I was the one being difficult. "My car was towed, and I have to pick up my son from soccer practice. You're just standing here doing nothing, so just give me your keys. I'll bring it back later." I blinked hard. "You want me to hand you my car?" "Yes," she said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. I gestured toward the Uber idling at the curb, the driver scrolling on his phone while waiting for a ride request. "There's literally an Uber right there." She scoffed. "I don't do Ubers. I don't trust strangers." I stared at her, then looked down at my car keys in my hand. "You realize you're asking a complete stranger for their entire car, right?" "That's different," she snapped, folding her arms even tighter. "How exactly?" She inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. "Because you're being incredibly rude right now." I let out a short, sharp laugh. "I'm being rude? Lady, you just marched up my driveway and demanded my car like this is some medieval feudal system." Her face turned an impressive shade of red. "I knew you'd be difficult. I was hoping you'd just be a decent person, but clearly that's too much to ask." I was torn between amusement and sheer disbelief. Was she serious? Did people like this actually exist outside of internet horror stories? Karen, because of course, that was the name I had already assigned her in my head, pulled out her phone and started furiously typing. "Are you seriously texting someone about this?" I asked, shifting the weight of the grocery bags in my arms. She gave me a smug smirk. "No, I'm calling 911. I nearly dropped the gallon of milk in my hands." "What?" She turned slightly, pressing the phone to her ear, and in her most dramatic, high-pitched voice, wailed, "Yes, hello? I need to report a crime. There's a man here refusing to return my car." My jaw hit the pavement. She was actually doing this. By now, the neighbors had taken notice. Blinds were peeling back, front doors cracking open, and a few had stepped out onto their porches, watching with unabashed curiosity. Fantastic. Now I had an audience for this absolute circus. Karen, seeing the attention, doubled down. "Yes, officer, he's standing right here. He's being aggressive." I let out a slow breath, running a hand over my face. "You're out of your mind." But it was too late. A few minutes later, the wail of sirens sliced through the quiet suburban afternoon, and a patrol car pulled up in front of my house, lights flashing. Two officers stepped out, their expressions a mix of annoyance and exhaustion, like they already knew this was going to be a colossal waste of their time. Karen, still standing there like the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood, lit up with triumph. Finally, she thought she had won. She had no idea just how badly this was about to backfire. The officers barely looked at me before turning to Karen, their patience already wearing thin. The taller officer, whose name tag read Mitchell, exhaled and asked the most obvious question in the world. "Ma'am, whose name is on the title of the vehicle?" Karen didn't hesitate. "His, but..." "Then it's his car," Mitchell said flatly, cutting her off before she could launch into whatever nonsense argument she had prepared. The second officer, Ramirez, glanced at me with a look that read, "I am so sorry you have to deal with this woman. Ma'am, you can't just call 911 because someone won't let you borrow their car." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her frustration reaching a boiling point. "He's stranding me here," she snapped, like she had just caught me in some heinous crime. Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "You live in this neighborhood?" Karen scoffed. "Obviously. Then you're not stranded." Ramirez turned and gestured toward the Uber driver, who was now fully invested in this free entertainment. "And there's a ride right there." Karen's jaw clenched. She knew she had lost. But instead of backing down, she pivoted hard. "Fine," she sneered, flipping her sunglasses onto her head. "I'll just get my lawyer involved." Mitchell let out a barely concealed sigh. "Good luck with that." I watched as Karen huffed, stomped her foot like an angry child, and stormed off down the street. The officers gave me a nod before heading back to their patrol car, no doubt adding this story to their ever-growing list of the dumbest calls they had ever responded to. I exhaled, shaking my head. Surely that was the end of it. I had no idea it was only the beginning. The first fine arrived 3 days later. A neatly folded letter from the HOA sat in my mailbox, printed on official letterhead, informing me that I had been cited for a trash can violation. Apparently, I had left my garbage bin out too long after collection day, even though I had brought it in the same afternoon. I shrugged it off. Bureaucratic nonsense, nothing more. Then, the second fine arrived. This time, it was for grass height exceeding community standards. My lawn was immaculate. I kept it trimmed, edged, and green, probably better maintained than half the houses on the street. But according to the HOA, I was suddenly in violation. The third fine? Illegal vehicle modifications. I actually laughed at that one. My car was completely stock, a 2018 Honda Accord with 0 customizations. There was nothing even remotely illegal about it. That's when I knew. This wasn't a coincidence. One evening, as I stepped outside to grab my mail, I noticed Karen standing across the street, phone in hand, snapping photos of my house. My stomach clenched with irritation. "What are you doing?" She didn't even flinch. HOA takes neighborhood violations very seriously. I scoffed. "Oh yeah? Is that why you're out here playing paparazzi with my mailbox?" She smiled, like this was all some kind of game to her. "I don't make the rules," she said sweetly, turning and strutting back toward her house. Oh, she was enjoying this. I took the fine straight to the next HOA meeting, determined to call out the absurdity. The room was filled with the usual crowd, mostly older homeowners, some retirees, a few younger residents who just wanted to stay out of neighborhood politics. I stepped up, holding the notices. "I'd like to dispute these fines." The HOA president, Mr. Collins, barely glanced up from his paperwork. "All violations are reviewed before being issued." I set the papers down on the table in front of him. My grass is fine. My car is fine. My trash cans were out for less than a day. This isn't about violations. This is about someone using the HOA to harass me. There were a few murmurs in the crowd. Some people nodded. Others glanced toward the back of the room, where Karen sat, arms crossed, a smug look on her face. Collins flipped through the papers, then shrugged. The fines stand. That's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just filing complaints, she had the HOA board in her pocket. This wasn't about rules. This was about punishment. Fine. If they wanted to play dirty, so could I. But before I could even come up with my next move, Karen escalated things in a way I never saw coming. The next morning, I walked outside and my car was gone. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. I stood in my driveway, staring at the empty space where my car had been the night before. There were no broken windows, no signs of forced entry, nothing to suggest it had been stolen. I pulled out my phone and checked my security camera feed, scrolling back through the footage. That's when I saw it. A tow truck had rolled up in the middle of the night. The grainy footage showed two men stepping out, checking a clipboard, then methodically hooking up my car like they were on official business. There were no flashing lights, no sirens, nothing dramatic, just two guys in reflective vests doing a job they clearly thought was legitimate. I felt a slow burn of rage start in my chest. My car hadn't been stolen. It had been taken. I immediately called the number listed on the side of the truck, barely keeping my voice in check as I asked where my car had been taken. The operator rattled off an address, the impound lot. I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed my keys, got into my old beater truck, the only other vehicle I owned, and drove straight to the lot, fuming the entire way. By the time I got there, I was ready for war. The guy at the front desk barely glanced up as I slapped my ID and car registration down in front of him. My car was towed from my own driveway, I said, voice tight. I want it back. Now. He sighed, already looking bored. Let's see, he typed a few things into the computer, then frowned. Says here it was removed due to an HOA violation. I laughed, short and sharp. That's funny. Because I never got a notice about my car being illegally parked. The guy just shrugged. We don't ask questions. We get a request from an HOA, we follow through. And which HOA submitted this request? He flipped through some paperwork, then turned the page toward me. There it was, in black and white, Karen's name. She had signed off on the complaint personally. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. So let me get this straight. My car, legally parked in my own driveway, was towed because someone on my HOA board filed a complaint. And you didn't verify if the complaint was legitimate before taking it? The guy shrugged again, as if this was nothing new. If they sign off, we assume it's valid. I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. And how much do I have to pay to get my legally parked car back? He tapped the screen, completely unfazed. $385. I inhaled deeply, letting the number settle in my mind. Nearly $400, just to reclaim my own property from a fraudulent towing job. I had no choice but to pay. The entire ride home, I gripped the steering wheel like I was trying to break it. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was done. When I pulled into my driveway, Karen was outside watering her roses, watching me with an expression that bordered on gleeful. She didn't say anything, didn't gloat, didn't even smirk. But the look on her face was enough. She knew exactly what she had done. I killed the engine and stepped out, still holding the receipt from the impound lot in my hand. This is harassment, I said, my voice eerily calm. She glanced up at me with feigned innocence. Oh. I have no idea what you mean. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You had my car towed in the middle of the night. From my own driveway. You falsified a complaint, Karen. She pursed her lips, feigning thoughtfulness. Well, if the HOA deemed it necessary, I'm sure they had a good reason. I exhaled slowly, forcing my rage down. You have no idea what you've started. Karen just smiled, turning back to her garden as if the conversation was over. But I wasn't finished. This wasn't a petty neighborhood squabble anymore. This was war. And if Karen thought she could keep playing her little games without consequences, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. I knew Karen wasn't done. That woman had the persistence of a cockroach in a nuclear apocalypse. She wasn't going to let this go until she either won or I was driven insane. But after the fraudulent towing incident, I was watching my back, waiting for her next move. And sure enough, it came. 3 days later. I had just stepped outside to grab my mail when I saw her. Lying on the pavement at the edge of my driveway, clutching her ankle like she'd been shot. For a moment, I actually hesitated, wondering if she'd really hurt herself. But then I saw it, the way she kept glancing around, checking to see if anyone was watching. The dramatic little groans she was letting out, like she was auditioning for a soap opera. And the way, as soon as she spotted me, her expression shifted into one of pure, calculated outrage. "You," she screeched, pointing an accusatory finger at me as if I'd physically pushed her. "Look what you did." I blinked. "What?" She let out an exaggerated wince, gripping her ankle tighter. "Your driveway, it's a hazard. I tripped over the cracks, and now I'm injured. I could have broken my ankle." I stared at my driveway. It was perfectly paved. Smooth. Not a single crack, dip, or uneven surface. This was a setup. "You tripped on nothing," I said flatly. Her face contorted into righteous indignation. "How dare you? I was just out for a walk when suddenly, bam. I went down. I could have hit my head. You're lucky I'm even conscious right now." I folded my arms. "Oh yeah? And you just happened to fall on my driveway?" She gasped, as if I'd just accused her of high treason. "Are you suggesting I did this on purpose? That's outrageous. I would never fake an injury." I pulled out my phone, already opening my security camera app. "Then I'm sure you won't mind if I check the footage." A flicker of panic crossed her face. Just for a second. But then she composed herself, sitting up straighter. "Check all you want," she sniffed. "I know what happened, and so will my lawyer." My stomach tightened with frustration. I didn't trust this woman as far as I could throw her, but I also knew she was just unhinged enough to take this to court. Later that night, I pulled up the footage. And there it was, the undeniable proof. The video showed Karen walking up to my driveway, pausing, glancing around to make sure no one was looking, then deliberately stepping forward and collapsing like a cartoon villain. She hadn't just fallen, she'd staged the whole thing. I let out a slow breath. Unbelievable. The next morning, before I even had a chance to confront her, I found an envelope in my mailbox. A formal legal notice. Karen was suing me for negligence leading to personal injury, claiming my dangerous driveway had caused her to suffer pain, emotional distress, and temporary loss of mobility. She wanted me to cover her medical bills, lost wages, and an additional $10,000 in damages. I actually laughed. Out loud. I didn't waste time. I forwarded the security footage to my lawyer, who nearly choked on his coffee when he saw it. He assured me this case wouldn't even make it past the first hearing, but I still had to go through the motions, court dates, paperwork, legal fees. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, I walked in with my lawyer, completely at ease. Karen, on the other hand, was playing up her injury for all it was worth. She showed up in a medical boot, hobbling dramatically on crutches. She threw pitiful glances at the judge, as if she were the victim of some horrible injustice. Her lawyer, a slick-looking guy who clearly either didn't know or didn't care that his client was a fraud, launched into a speech about irresponsible property maintenance and how my negligence had deeply impacted Karen's quality of life. And then it was my turn. My lawyer stood, calm and composed, and without a single word, pressed play on the security footage. The silence in the courtroom was beautiful. The judge watched as Karen very deliberately positioned herself, faked her fall, and flopped onto my driveway like a dying fish. When the video ended, the judge turned to Karen with an expression of absolute disgust. Ms. Reynolds, he said, because yes, Karen finally had a last name now, one that would forever be tied to this ridiculous lawsuit in court records. You faked this injury? Karen's face drained of color. I was disoriented. I don't remember. The judge slammed his gavel. Case dismissed. Her lawyer buried his face in his hands. I turned to Karen, resisting the urge to smile. She was fuming, her hands clenched into fists as she turned on her good foot and stormed out, forgetting the crutches entirely. That would have been the end of it. But Karen? Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. And she still had one last card to play. Karen disappeared for a few days after her humiliating loss in court, but I knew she wasn't gone for good. She wasn't the type to admit defeat, she was the type to double down. And sure enough, when she finally resurfaced, she wasn't alone. She had the entire HOA board behind her. It started with more fines. Bigger, bolder, more ridiculous. Suddenly, my mailbox was the wrong color. My porch light was too bright. My car was parked at an unapproved angle in my driveway. They were throwing everything they could at me, hoping I'd either cave or move out. But here's the thing. They messed with the wrong guy. I spent 2 weeks digging into HOA records, filing public requests, talking to neighbors, and putting together a very ugly puzzle. Karen wasn't just a board member, she was pulling the strings behind the scenes. She had been bribing certain board members, filing fake complaints against people she didn't like, and worst of all, using HOA funds for personal expenses. When I finally had all the evidence, I didn't just send it to the HOA. I sent it to the entire neighborhood. The next HOA meeting was absolute chaos. Homeowners were furious. They demanded answers. Board members turned on each other, pointing fingers, desperate to save themselves. And Karen? She sat there, face pale, watching as her empire crumbled in real time. The vote to remove her was unanimous. The vote to report her fraudulent activities to the state? Also unanimous. Karen stormed out of the meeting, shouting about lawsuits and defamation, but no one was listening. 2 weeks later, a for sale sign went up in her yard. The final nail in the coffin? The morning she was set to move out, a tow truck arrived in front of her house. At first, I thought she had called it herself. But then I saw the look on her face, the pure, undiluted rage. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, as the driver hooked up her car. She spotted me, eyes burning with hatred. "This is your fault," she shrieked. I took a slow sip of my coffee and shrugged. "You really should try Uber." And just like that, she was gone. Some people think the world owes them everything. But entitlement can't override karma. And my car keys? Yeah, Karen's never getting her hands on them. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.